Welcome back to the Foreign Desk podcast. I'm Lisa Daftari. So much Iran in the news today, and for a while now. We know that the U.S. is in Vienna at the negotiating table trying to get back into another JCPOA deal. But in the meantime, more provocations from Iran on the ground, by sea, and online. Where are we supposed to look? And is it too late to stop the Iranian regime? Those who say the Iranian regime is on its way to getting a nuclear weapon, continuing to put money into regional terror, continuing its human rights abuses back at home, say the Iranian regime needs to be stopped. But in the meantime, the pressure that was previously put by the Trump administration, does it even exist anymore? The Iranian regime is making partners for itself in trade, being able to take this pressure off. Most recently, the China-Iran deal that was announced, 25 years, $400 billion. To make sense of all of this, we're calling on Xiyue Wang again to join us, back by popular demand. Xiyue, of course, is a regional expert. He's a fellow at AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, is a very prominent think tank, and of course, a PhD candidate at Princeton University. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm really glad to be here.
Of course, we first heard your name when you were arrested by the Iranian regime and held as a hostage there for over 3 years. And for those of you who don't know Xiyue's story, I encourage you to go back and watch our podcast. He outlines the horrific ordeal that he went through, which really puts you at a very unique place and position to understand from your perspective the Iranian regime, what they do, in addition to your expertise. And I know that one of the main areas of your expertise is the relationship between China, Russia, Iran, the United States, and understanding this geopolitical relationship. We call on you today, not as the hostage that endured all of that like we did last time. We call on you today as this expert to help us make sense of this triangular relationship between China, the United States, and Iran. We might even get to Russia if we have time, because I know that that's part of your expertise as well. Let's catch people up. So it was announced recently that Iran and China will be getting into a 25-year deal that will total up to $400 billion in oil sales and such. We saw the handshake between the Chinese and Iranian officials in Tehran. And, you know, we talk about this pressure that we put on the Iranian regime under the Trump era. We talk about how it had really minimalized the Iranian regime to a place that we liked. We like to see them really marginalized. We like to see them put under pressure for their nuclear program, if not other things. But you know, now they're saying, well, we'll do this on our own. And there are plenty of free agents out there, China being one of them, that are wealthy enough, that are, you know, rogue enough, that will bail us out. How do you rate this deal? I mean, is it significant for China? Is it significant for Iran? Who got the better deal here? And what will it mean?
In order to understand the China-Iran deal and its impact better, I think we need to go a little bit into the beginning of it in 2016. So the Chinese President Xi Jinping was the first world leader visiting Iran after the implementation of the JCPOA in early 2016. In fact, President Xi arrived in Iran 2 days before I did. I was fortunate to stay with the Chinese state-owned company. I stayed in their guest house because of the lack of logistical support through American institutions in Tehran. So I had an intensive communication and interaction with the Chinese business community in Tehran. So I had some thought about China's relation with Iran, especially its business and commercial interest there. So the deal was originally broached during President Xi's visit at that time, but it did not materialize. If you look at what happened in 2016, sanctions were lifted, suspended, and Iran got more readily available international options, where they were ready to engage with other mainly Western companies and investors on larger projects in Iran, where China, the Chinese argument being, Iran was under sanction. China was the country that supported Iran the most. So now you're under the sanctions are lifted. Naturally, we want to deepen the relation, a commercial relation with Iran. But that just didn't come through to the extent the Chinese wanted. Several major Chinese companies representatives told me it was very difficult to deal with Iranian companies and their Iranian counterparts to convince them, in fact, to allow the deeper Chinese penetration to Iranian markets, because Iran naturally, when options are available, just like any other country, would want to diverse its collaboration and cooperation with different countries rather than allowing China to penetrate deep into its various sectors, which is a very natural thing to do considering the national interest. And then this is 2016. In 2018, when the U.S. sanction was reimposed, when President Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, it no longer made sense for China to enter into a deal like that broached in 2016. Because the political risk was simply immense. So if you look at the figures, the trade figures,
what was? I'm sorry. What were the political risks at that time?
Well, China is just as risk averse as other country when it comes down to investing in Iran. When the U.S. sanctions kicked in again, China would have to reckon if it decides to continue its cooperation with Iran, it will expose its interest under U.S. sanctions. Would China want to do that? The answer, as we saw, is no. So the U.S. sanctions were effective in terms of preventing China from having a more broad and deeper collaboration with Iran. And then the Sino-Iran trade also plummeted from, I believe, more than 30 billion. I may be wrong, don't remember the specific number, but I think more than $30 billion in 2017, and plunged to 14.9 billion in 2020, which shows just how effective the U.S. sanctions were in preventing China from deepening its business and economic relations with Iran. And
no, you brought up something that's probably on the minds of 80 million Iranian people, and so many of the Iranian expats and those who understand, Iranian relations, or U.S. foreign policy relations with Iran, I should say. You said deep penetration into Iran, and I think that is the fear of so many Iranians, that the country was basically sold over, that China will have access, that China will be able to, basically own, for lack of a better word, the Iranians, their markets, their everything, the day to day. How significant is this fear, and what will it look like for 25 years?
Well, I think the Iranians' fear of the over-penetration by China into Iran has a very deep historical reason, right? So if you look at Iran's history in the past several hundred years, geostrategically, Iran was attacked left and right in history, and in most recent history, we all know the British encroachment from the south, the Russian encroachment from the north, and in the 20th century, the Shah's regime entered into close collaboration with the United States, and the United States even had extra territorial legal agreement, meaning the Americans committed crime in Iran that will be subject to not Iranian law. So these had effect on how Iranians look at foreign penetration into Iranian interests. But the reality, is more complicated. In fact, the Chinese companies, ever since they started cooperating with Iran, a major thing that they talk about is the stringent terms of contracts. And it is actually not very easy. The way, I think, rightfully, because of Iran's particular historic experience, the Iranian regime actually does not really allow China to penetrate easily. Today, though, the situation is rather different because, to a large extent, if Iran is under severe U.S. pressure, then it would have no alternative but to try whatever possible to get closer with China and enlist China as a supporter for more Chinese investment and trade. The problem is that is rather self-inflicted damage by the regime, because the regime has decided it does not want a constructive relation with the West, especially with the United States, particularly for the reason of regime prosperity and survival. So they basically threw the interest of Iranian people under the track. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying, I think, and I want you to double down on that, is that it was the maximum pressure campaign that led the Iranians right into the hands of the Chinese.
Yes. Yes and no. So when the pressure were there, the Iranian regime wanted to engage China, but China had to keep a distance from Iran because the sanctions were effective, and China did not want to expose its interest to U.S. sanctions. So that collaboration didn't go really far. And bearing in mind, the deal resurfaced in June 2020 when a draft of it was leaked through a Iranian government source. But what was worth noting is that when the draft of the deal leaked, the Chinese Foreign Ministry actually at least twice avoided commenting on the deal. The entire Chinese government remained silent about the deal, and certainly they did not sign the deal when President Trump was still in power, because obviously the Chinese weren't sure about the trajectory of U.S. policy towards Iran. Who would be the next U.S. president? Because that would define the course of U.S. policy towards Iran in the next couple of years. And then if you look at the China-Iran trade closely, then in November, when President Biden was elected, the the Chinese illicit purchase of Iranian oil skyrocketed, which was kept at a very low, consistently low level under Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign. Suddenly shot up after Biden has won the election, basically showing the Chinese were being opportunistic and thinking, well, America is switching course, and we need to make use this opportunity and adopt this new reality. Mm-hmm. And I have written in foreign policy in last December. I said, if President Biden decides to offer concessions to Iran too soon, then the China has got Iran back. China has got Iran's back. Story or fear would unfold like a self-fulfilling prophecy. China and Iran will sign the deal or some version of it. And my prediction turned out to be true on the basis that the U.S. determination under the Biden administration to re-engage with Iran to go back to nuclear deal, the U.S. Reluctance to enforce sanctions on Iran encouraged China to move forward with the deal with Iran. Yeah.
So basically, just to summarize, you're saying the maximum pressure campaign under President Trump was what initiated the deal, but the sanctions actually worked. So there was a pause, and the new sheriff in town, they knew would be much more relaxed, would allow their free flow of business into Iran at some point. And because of that, President Biden's image and the perception, then that's what caused them to complete the deal.
Please let me to be a little bit specific. The deal was first talked about during Obama administration in early 2016. But remember, it did not come to fruition when JCPOA was in place. And until 2020, when the deal was leaked, in my opinion, was a kind of a public relation gambit on the Iranian side.
Why so many leaks from the Iranian regime? Obviously, this is not a coincidence. These things aren't leaked. Like you said, public relations stunt.
Well, you leak for a purpose, right? So imagine this was a second half of 2020, and then there will be U.S. election. So the Iranian, in my opinion, the leak was intentional, or likely to be intentional, to show that President Trump's maximum pressure campaign has failed, and which has pushed Iran to get closer with China, and China has got Iran's back. And if you check, several major foreign policy outlets talked about this purported deal on those terms. So I think it is misinterpreted.
And why now? I mean, we said it was first talked about. The topic was just broached in 2016, and there's again no coincidences when it comes to Iran's regime. Right now, they're at the table in Vienna. There's so many things going on that wouldn't make them look so good. This China-Iran deal being one of them. What's the message in announcing the deal now?
Well, this is the tricky part. If you look at the timing of the deal, it was signed in late March. Is the time where the Biden administration is really trying to push a rapid return to the JCPOA, and what the deal did, in fact, is creating a public relation push on in the West, in the United States, saying basically you will see some leading media outlets saying, well, China and Iran are jointly defying the U.S. and then the U.S. sanctions are not effective. Iran has got a major public relation win, etc., etc. Basically saying, if we don't go back to JCPOA as soon as possible, China and Iran will form an anti-American alliance, and then by then it will be even more difficult to ring Iran in. So therefore, we must go back to JCPOA as soon as possible.
Wait, just let's stop there because we want to bring people up to speed. I think I know what you're saying, and we've talked about this before, but I want everyone else to catch up on this as well. You're basically saying they announced this deal. They're thinking the U.S. will have FOMO and say, we don't want to miss out. We want in on this, so that they would rush into the JCPOA because Iran has only left that path for them to normalize relations with the regime, so that it would make things go even faster into a nuclear deal. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, this is my interpretation. Yes.
And based
but
on
also, I just want to add. I think from the Biden administration point of view, the deal would also do another thing. That is, the deal would supposedly empower the reformists slash Iranian moderates at the cost of the hardliners. This is so because the Biden administration still believes, based on what they say in the public, that we can engage with the moderates and we can work with them. We can somehow change Iranian behavior, support us through empowering them. And then look at the Rouhani-Zarif team in the last 8 years. The only thing they promised the Iranian people two things: more political tolerance and transparency, and a negotiation on the nuclear issue and lifting Western U.S. sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
So the first promise, political promise, obviously has failed. The regime, the so-called moderate administration, did not deliver more political tolerance. The situation has gone worse.
They're not moderate. So let's clarify first. So and I
that's why I say
it up.
Yes, that's why I say so-called moderates.
Yes,
right?
So there are no moderates in Iran. I just want to clarify this one point. But what they've done for years is touted the line between moderates and hardliners, so that it looks like good cop, bad cop, and they can basically switch off whenever it serves them. But you know as well as I do that President Biden understands that all of it is coming from Khamenei, all of it's coming from the IRGC, all of it is in the power is in the same hands, right?
Well, I think that's obvious, but somehow the Biden administration officials and then the proponents of the JCPOA are still pushing this argument forward: moderates versus the hardliners, as if we empower the moderates, it will make a fundamental difference, which I don't think is a reasonable assumption. But back to what I was just saying. Imagine that the second economic promise by the Rouhani administration that we're going to lift U.S. sanctions, that didn't pan out so well either, right? Mm-hmm. Iran actually came under even more severe pressure under President Trump.
Right.
And then, so judging from, if we judge the Rouhani administration's performance, it's basically a total failure and in terms of delivering its promise. So imagine now the situation if China-Iran deal can be presented as something useful, then it will give the moderates political capital. And if the United States can return to the JCPOA before the June election, and then I think the Biden administration and the many people who support the JCPOA still believe that we have enough sway. The U.S. has enough sway on Iranian domestic politics, and we can somehow, if I may just express my opinion boldly, so they may believe that we can somehow facilitate the victory of so-called moderates in the June election, then therefore we can work with them. But again, I think that's history has shown over and over again that counting on the moderates has really not produced the desired result.
Let's go back to the triangulation and let's fast forward because, we have talked about this before and on this show about how there probably will be a deal. What it looks like, we can come back to that. And I actually want to ask you your opinion on what a deal should look like. But let's fast forward just about, 8 months to a year from now. What is the U.S. concerned about a China-Iran deal? How much influence can the U.S. have if we re-enter the JCPOA in the triangle that is between Iran, China, and the U.S.?
Well, you see, I would argue the Biden administration tacitly facilitated the China-Iran deal. They may argue, in fact, that the deal, for now, probably lacks real substance. If you look at it, there's no evidence indicating the the $400 billion over 25-year period investment is true. And then there doesn't seem to be a substantial military component to the deal. Again, everything remains concealed. We don't know the details, but it seems that there's no indication, there's no evidence to support any real substance in the deal. So based on this, the Biden administration may think, well, there isn't a substance, so why should we worry about that?
Wait, how can they have it both ways? Because we said they are, on the one hand, they're going to use it as pretense to say we have to rush into a JCPOA, but then you think that deep down inside, they're not worried about the real substance of the deal?
No, I mean, they may argue or they may justify the deal that way. But my concern is that maybe that is the case, that the deal lacks a real substance at the moment. But the very fact that the Biden administration is going back to the the JCPOA, no matter what. So even at the cost of facilitating a China-Iran deal now to placate Iran. So what that implies is that, so as long as we can get back, Iran back to JCPOA compliance, we don't even mind taking China into the broader picture and facilitate a potentially deeper collaboration between China and Iran, even if that is potentially at the cost of U.S. interest. So I think that's where the problem lies. So yes, maybe the deal today doesn't really contain any substance, but it does not mean it won't in the future, especially when the Biden administration is very determined to placate Iran and give Iran whatever they want. The regime wants to go back to the JCPOA. Then yes, even the Biden's acting Undersecretary for Middle Eastern Affairs, Joy Hood, said we want Iran and China to have a closer collaboration, a good collaboration, which, statement as such reassures China that as long as you can facilitate to bring Iran back to compliance, we don't mind you deepen your interest in that region. What will happen in the future? Let's not talk about that. That seems to be the attitude of the administration, which I think is problematic.
Very much problematic, and I think that we talked about the timing of all of this, and Tehran knows that they have a partner in Washington D.C. Regardless, if it's like you show up to buy a house and the owner of the house already knows you want the house, so they can say whatever price they want. They can have their own terms, and that's exactly what we're dealing with at the negotiating table with Iran's regime. You have all of these provocations. You have all of this threats. The money pouring into terrorism. People online are telling us on Twitter, for example. I know you're very active on Twitter as well, and I encourage you guys to follow Xiyue because he has some fantastic tweets about the reality of our foreign policy with Iran day in and day out. I know you've said before that we should enter into a deal with Iran, but it should look a certain way. What should a good deal in your mind look like with Iran?
I think a good deal with Iran would address an array of issues, including more restrictions on Iran's nuclear program towards nuclear weapons, and then Iran's regional behavior must be addressed, and Iran's missile program should be addressed. And then also very importantly, relevant to ordinary Iranians' daily life, the human rights aspect of the Iranian regime should be addressed. I'm not saying this deal would cure all the problems, would provide solutions to all the problems of Iran or the Iranian regime is creating. But I think it is a reasonable expectation that through a deal as such, Iranian behavior would be controlled, and then its malice would be constricted, and I think we need a deal like that. And then with the leverage we have created during the Trump administration, I think we're in the direction towards that. And then many people hoped that the Biden administration will be able to build on the leverage the Trump administration has left for the Biden administration. But unfortunately, they are taking away all the leverages we have accumulated. How are we going to negotiate from a position of strength on the negotiation table if we're taking our leverages, or leverage away without getting anything back?
Even the Trump administration with the maximum pressure campaign that I agree was working, and we saw the numbers. Just look at the economic charts, and then obviously it was working. And we saw the reaction from the leadership in Iran, the Islamic Republic, and we know that it was absolutely working. But the Trump administration would talk about, we're not pushing for regime change, we're pushing for behavioral change. We didn't see any behavioral change. And we came to a place where, okay, there's maximum pressure campaign, but then what? And based on what you just said, yes, the ideal, the unicorn deal that we would get from the Iranian regime would include everything you said. But what you're basically advocating for, and I'm just pushing back because I want to get your reaction, is reforming the system, reforming the regime. And so many people throughout that are, tweeting me every day in Farsi from Iran say there is no way. I mean, this is the repeated message. There is no way to change this regime. They just need to be removed. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think the Iranian people have to decide the fate of the political future of their own country. I would argue the U.S. Should help create an environment conducive to that. But we cannot actively pursue a regime change policy, because that will just create all kinds of legitimacy issues after or during and after the pursuit of regime change. Again, I believe the Iranian people have to should be in the position, should be put in the position to decide the future of their country, especially considering Iran's traumatic history with outside powers in the last couple hundred years.
And I agree with you. The Iranian people need to choose their path forward. And if we create an environment in which they can, for example, under the maximum pressure campaign, there were many protests in Iran. And a lot of them alluded to thanking Trump and thanking, I know it sounds very strange for people to understand that the Iranian people, a good segment of them, understand the sanctions, even though it does hurt them. They understand that the sanctions are a means to an end, that they're meant to curb the behavior of their government. And for that reason, we saw a lot more protests on the streets. But we saw also thousands of people get killed. We know that report has since been removed from the State Department archives for some reason. But we know that somewhere between 1,500 to many thousands of peaceful protesters were gunned down for going out onto the streets. So, I mean, let's talk. I mean, let's leave the textbook talk and the think tank talk, and let's talk real talk. I mean, what are the options for the Iranian people when on the international stage we are wedged between two bad decisions? Even a good deal with this regime would mean that they're cheating behind the scenes. It would be a piece of paper. It would be meaningless. Don't you agree?
Well, that's why I think it is important that the United States to put credible deterrence on the table. That we will have a deal, but if Iran does not abide by the deal, then there will be consequence. The problem, as I see it, this moment is the Biden administration precisely is taking that credibility of deterrence. I mean, there's still deterrence, but they're not credible. For example, in the February U.S. strike on the Iranian militia on the Syrian-Iraqi border, it was a serious strike that intended to convey a serious a message, but that was not taken seriously by Iran, because the Biden administration, on the other hand, is so hell-bent to return to the deal and ready to give everything up in exchange for Iran's return to compliance. Basically, what that does is that you're taking that credibility away. Your deterrence doesn't mean very much anymore. And then the Biden administration rhetoric today is the same. Basically, they're conveying a just like you said, if not the regime has not changed the behavior under Trump's maximum pressure campaign, and then the enrichment has gone up so much more, and they're closer than ever to breaking up to breaking out point. These facts are all correct. However, we need to put them in broader context, meaning the maximum pressure campaign, started in 2018, and then the heavy pressure, like a sanctioning of Iranian central bank and all that, did not come until much later, right? So that means the maximum pressure campaign has not given enough time to really unfold. Remember, Iran is a big country with a relatively diverse economy, huge internal market that can weather sanctions. So for 2 years, if the maximum campaign has not produced the desired result, it doesn't mean that it won't in the future, in the near future, I would say, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that if you put yourself in Iranian regime's shoes, and now you are under Trump's maximum pressure, what are your options, right? So I think it makes perfect sense that while you step up provocations all around to show that pressure will not bring the Iranian regime to its knees, because otherwise you will face authoritarian regimes by showing weakness is inviting implosion, elite abandoning the regime. So they couldn't do that. The only thing that makes sense for them to do is to step up provocation and aggression, as if the maximum pressure cannot work. But we need to ask ourselves, how long can they do this? And once they do that, and I also think that is very important, once they do that, the credible deterrence aspect should kick in, which I think under the Trump administration exactly happened. When Soleimani was attacking the U.S. embassy, he was killed decisively, and then that conveys a very, very strong message. If you provoke, there will be consequence, and that deterrence was real and credible. And then after that, we didn't see the Iranians taking major steps in terms of provocation. And also, we need to note the Iranian regime did not take major steps towards violating the JCPOA when Trump was still in power. Right? They took major steps when President Biden came to power, showing the determination of returning to the deal. Right? Because very easily, very obviously, President Biden has taken the credible deterrence away, conveying, even arguing, if not this deal, it'll be war, meaning we don't want a war. But ignoring the fact that sometimes the best way to avoid war is to threaten with a war. Right? Nobody wants war, but if Iranian regime will provoke and step up its aggression, there will be serious consequence. But now, I don't think the Iranian regime believes that. They believe Biden doesn't want a confrontation. Biden doesn't want a war. So let's exploit that.
Absolutely. A childhood mentor of mine once said, "Once you settle, you get less than you settled for," and that's what it is. If we're going to aim to get to the 2015 JCPOA, even though things are much worse now, we're not even going to get what we got at the 2015 JCPOA. It's going to be much worse than that, with many more transgressions.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, if you have kept a close attention to the media, even some senior official from the administration has announced we're open to lifting non-nuclear sanctions. We will reveal because some of the sanctions are illegitimate.
Right.
I think that's very problematic. That means we are willing to go much further than just going back to the deal in terms
Right.
To placate and appease Iran. But
And
where does it really
right,
go?
and we're willing to blame ourselves rather than blame you. That's the message here. They'd rather say that Donald Trump was wrong, or I should say, his administration, Mike Pompeo, whoever was involved in putting the sanctions, were wrong, rather than blame a terrorist regime that has so much blood on its hands, American blood, Iranian blood, and so forth. Xiyue, you're brilliant. Your analysis is spot on and always appreciated on our show. I hope that you will be back even once more. I encourage all of you to watch our episode. I will link it below, in which he talks about his experience in being in an Iranian prison, and where he gets all of his real passion for talking about this subject and expertise. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate you. And you can follow him on Twitter. You can follow his newest articles that are posted there as well. And thank you so much, Xiyue, for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about my opinions.
Of course, and we'll hopefully talk to you again very soon. And for the rest of you who'd like to subscribe to our podcast, go to youtube.com/Lisa Daftari. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts, on Pandora and Spotify and iTunes. And if you'd like to sign up for our daily top 10, go to our website, foreigndesknews.com/newsletter, and you can sign up there. See you all next week.